Great. So the first thing I'll just remind you of is just up on the board here, I've got our Stage 2 Research Project site, and I'll just remind you of the fact that there's two resources that are going to be really helpful to you. The first is that Weebly. That was created by Miss Charlton, but it reflects all research project classes. So the information on there is law. Okay, so that's the go-to. If you're not sure about anything, if you want examples, that's the stuff everyone is accessing. This site is for stuff that we cover in our class. Okay, so it's just notes, anything I might say to you, any resources I might talk about. So you've got these sort of two sites. I know it's a little bit confusing, but I hope that you get your head around it. And the link to that first site is to the Weebly is here, in case you haven't been there before and you don't know. And I've put this link on DayMap. Okay, so your DayMap notes will most commonly say, today we did blah, blah, blah. The link to the site is. Cool? All right, lovely. So this is everything we did so far. Welcome to the research project. We already talked through this. We talked a little bit about this idea of how do you know what you know and what makes someone an expert. So hopefully you sort of got a little bit of that in the back of your head. We talked about, you remember we did how long have humans been in Australia, and we did about 5 minutes of searching on that, and we found about 5 different answers, didn't we? Okay, so I thought I'd pull the thread of that a little bit. We talked about does anyone remember the name of this creature?
A dinosaur?
It is a dinosaur, but the term dinosaur didn't exist when it was named. It was actually called the iguanodon. Fantastic. That was a completely irrelevant piece of information to remember, but the fact that you did it was great. Okay, it's a shame you couldn't use that brain space for something more useful. Okay, so here we are today. All right. So my question is, what should I be doing? You know, I wonder if that's sort of on your head. You know, you've got kind of 4 weeks. What should I be doing? I've got 4 weeks. I'm sort of sitting here. You're not necessarily telling me what to do. What should I be doing? Okay. The first thing I want to kind of just draw to your attention is, and I've said this to all of you in discussion, the goal of the folio is to tell a story. Yeah? It tells a story. And there's 2 characters to that story. The first is about how your understanding develops. So you should be able to tell me through your folio and the evidence you collect how your understanding developed. Where were you at the beginning? What were you thinking? What did you know? What were you confused about? And how did that understanding sort of change as you came along the line? The other story is about the capability. Okay, so it's I want you to almost think of these 2 things separately. Okay, and yes, they'll be interconnected at times, but really these are the 2 stories that you're telling through your folio. Okay, and I'm going to model what that might look like. Just really quickly, your primary focus at this stage should be the advancement of your research. Okay, so our refinement and planning processes should be pretty heavy set from the work we've already done. So you've got 4 weeks to really expand and develop your research. Okay, you've got to let the horse out of the gates and just kind of let it get away from you here. Okay. Imagine your folio as a story, your understanding. So how is your understanding developing? Yeah, like what did you think initially versus what do you think now? What's changed? What are the events and processes that are strengthening your understanding? Like what are the things that are actually making your understanding better? And what are you learning, and how is this prompting you to identify further questions for clarification? Okay, we want to see sequence, and I'm going to show you that in just a moment. The capability, we'll do a session on capabilities in more detail later on down the track, but just a couple of prompting questions. How is your capability developing? How's it developing? One of the key questions I said in discussion, I'd say, what should it develop? You'd say, literacy. I'd say, okay, well, what evidence are you going to collect to show that you're getting better at that skill? Yeah, and I'm going to model a little bit of that to you as well. Okay, just for fun. What are you pursuing that actively reflects growth in your chosen capability? Okay, if you've chosen literacy, if you've chosen critical and creative thinking, where are you throwing yourself into critical and creative thinking that's making you or challenging you to do something that you wouldn't have done otherwise? Where's the evidence of that? Does that make sense? Yeah. Where can we see evidence of that? That's the last thing that I just said. Okay, well, cool. All right. So let's kind of get into this business of what this is going to look like. So I've put up here, and I've put it as a PowerPoint, and I'm going to flick across and I'll kind of show it to you in PowerPoint. So I set myself a bit of a challenge, okay? And like I said, I want to model to you. I want to reflect a little bit. So yesterday afternoon at about 4:30, okay, I thought I've got this class coming up, and I've been thinking about it for a while. I spent a lot of my holidays doing jackhammering and hard labour. But it's good to be thinking during that time. I was thinking it would be really good to model this stuff. And last night I set myself a challenge from 4:30 to 5:30. I had 1 hour. And I thought, okay, well that's about a lesson, okay? So I set myself a task of achieving some research. Okay, now interestingly enough, I picked a topic. I picked the topic that we've already talked about, which was how long have humans been in Australia, okay? To be honest, I didn't know a great deal about it, yeah? So what I'm going to reflect to you is what I was able to uncover during that hour. What I hope that you're going to be able to see is how my understanding developed, okay? So I'm going to try and tell you a story, and I'm going to ask you afterwards whether you think the story is clear. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's the process. That's what I want to illustrate to you. And it was really, I guess, the key element in this is I started. I just picked this random thing. Okay. I'm not like a passionate paleontologist, despite my iguanodon story earlier on. I'm not like an archaeologist, even though I like Indiana Jones, but that's technically treasure hunting, not archaeology. But I just kind of picked this random thing. You know what? At the end of the hour, I was in it. Yeah. I was like, oh. Like the time actually, when my timer went off, I was like, damn it. Like I actually could have kept researching. And the guts of the thing is, when you sort of get into it, the motivation and the interest kind of builds. You know what I mean? You know, if I just sort of stood there thinking, oh yeah, I need to kind of get it done, I probably would have bored myself to death. But I got into it, and as I started to develop my understanding, I felt my motivation grow. And it's ultimately, one of the key things I'm going to say to you here, is that the key to success, okay, I actually say this kind of just over here, the key to success, so you need to ignite your interest and your passion for the topic, okay, that's the key, because if you think it's boring and you can't be bothered doing it, then the work's probably going to be crap, yeah? Okay, so this is what we're looking to ignite. You might not have it yet, you need to find it, okay, just like I found it. So a couple of quick things, okay? You might be starting with relatively little information about your question. You might have a lot, you might have a little, okay? Start by gathering a general understanding and then refine your knowledge based on inquiry and substantiation. That'll make more sense as we go. Start broad, go fast, skim read, note take, pose questions, okay? Now just as a starting point for a little bit of extra, okay? So take an extra minute, but I hope it'll be worth it. My question is, how long have Australians, or how long have human beings been in Australia? That's my question, okay? Now, I might be thinking straight away, oh, it'd be great to interview someone, okay? So just over here, how long, you know, I'm not going to write the whole thing. How long humans Australia, okay? It'd be great to survey or interview someone, okay? So maybe I've identified an expert straight away because I thought that would be a good idea. What do you reckon would be a good question to put in my email to an expert? Okay, so basically the same thing. I'm not even going to write it. I'm going to say question 1, so I'm going to ask that question. Okay? I might also say, I don't know, can you tell me how we know? You know, how do we know? How do we know how long people are like? Yeah, because I'm not saying how long they might send back. Oh, I don't know, 40,000 years. Oh, great. Well, how do you know? So I want you to tell me this. Tell me what you know. Okay. This is me as a relative. I don't know anything about this area. Don't know anything about this kind of thing. So I'm just asking these vague questions. I'm going to come back to that at the end for fun. Okay. So here's what I did. I got my question, and I googled it. It's the first thing I did. Anyone done that before? Yeah. Came up with the random things. This was the first source that came up. Yeah. Australian Museum. Oh, that's interesting. That sounds like a pretty credible source. I'm going to open that and read it. Okay, so this is the website that I went to, okay, and I've got my links kind of down the bottom, all right? Much of our knowledge about the earliest people in Australia comes from archaeology. The physical remains of human activity that have survived in the archaeological record are largely stone tools, rock art and ochre, shell middens, charcoal deposits and human skeletal remains. These all provide information on the tremendous length and complexity of Australian Aboriginal culture. Okay, now here's the key thing. All right, I've read that. That doesn't answer my question. In fact, it's actually generated questions. I have questions. Do you have questions?
I always have questions.
What's a question you could ask? What am I curious about?
Well, what would the process be to finding these bodies, and how do you determine how big they out.
I like that. Yeah, how do you find them? And how did, okay, so you're telling me your understanding to this question is largely based on tools, rocks, all this stuff. What do you do with this stuff that gives you, yeah, that's right. So my question's, well, how do these remains give an indication of time?
How do you know if it's right?
How do you know it's right? Yeah, isn't that interesting? You know, so notice how, like, my reading is prompting questions. I have questions as I'm reading. It's not answering my question. It's actually, you know, it's prompting more questions. The viewpoints about origins of these peoples was once entangled with the wider debate regarding the origins of all modern humans. During the 1980s and 1990s, two main viewpoints were that people either came out of Africa or were multi-regional. However, new fossils and improved DNA research have resulted in these models becoming obsolete. Ugh, I've got questions about that. Does anyone else have a question?
So are we like, did we not originate in that sort of African area?
Yeah, well, that's interesting.
That's kind of what we've always been told.
Yeah, I don't know. But there's something else that kind of sticks out to me here. Like, it's this. New and improved DNA research has resulted in old models being obsolete. Now, straight away I've identified something interesting, haven't I? Because what does that mean? Like, does that mean any findings before the 80s and 90s are potentially inaccurate?
But are these accurate? How do you know?
Well, that's right. But it's interesting, isn't it? So I've got questions. What led to the original assumptions? Okay, so what were you doing before? And what type of methods were traditionally used versus what you're doing differently today? So what should I be looking for? If I'm gathering evidence, what should I be looking for? Over the last few decades, a significant number of archaeological sites dated at more than 30,000 years old have been discovered. By this time in Australia, including the arid centre of Tasmania, was occupied. Okay, so by 30,000 years ago, all of Australia was occupied. Okay, that's interesting. Recently published dates of 120,000 years ago for the site of blah blah offer intriguing possibilities of much earlier occupations. The site contains remains of shellfish, crabs and fish. But definitive proof of human occupation is limited. Investigations are ongoing.
Well, how do you know if it's like crab and fish? Can you see
Yeah,
birds,
people
like,
like-
getting up and-
Yeah, can you see this stuff coming up? So here's like, what I'm showing you here is, here's what I'm taking from what I'm reading. Notice how I don't take all of it, but I take bits of it. And I ask questions, what type of evidence substantiates the time period and spread of population? Like, how do you know this? You know? How does shellfish indicate, like, you know, one person's telling me my initial search told me it's 40,000 years. Shellfish suggests that it's 120,000 years. So how does shellfish, like, what? I'm confused. I'm not following what's going on. I'm actually generating more questions. Lake Mungo, we talked about this last time. The oldest human remains in Australia were found at Lake Mungo. The site was occupied from 45,000 to 20,000 years ago. That's quite a spread, isn't it? You know, that's 15,000 years. Like, you know, it's not like saying, it was either like, 9 or 10 years ago. It's like thousands of years. Like, that's a pretty significant amount of time. Lake Mungo 1 was discovered in 1969, 26,000 years old. This is the most securely dated human burial in Australia. That's interesting, isn't it? It's the most securely dated. Okay, so this is, at the moment, this is the most reliable source of time. Okay, the other one here, discovered in 1974, due to the poor preservation of the pelvis, it's not clear if this is a man or a woman, but it's also shows us ranging from 26 to 60,000 years. So it sounds to me like 26,000 is a fairly sure thing. 60,000, 120,000 is a bit murky. Yeah? Okay. How is the evidence so varied? How do you get two human samples and then come up with this idea that one's a sure thing and the other one could be anywhere between 20 to 60,000 years old? You know?
Where's number 2?
It's interesting, isn't it? You know? So this, I started with nothing, okay? I started with nothing. Having read this, here's what I'm getting at, okay? Here's what I learned from this source. I learned all of these things, and here's the questions that I've formed, okay? So this source actually hasn't really answered my question. It's actually given me more questions that I need to answer in order to understand. I didn't really know what I didn't know, but now that I've read this initial kind of thing, so where'd I go? So reflection, having looked at my initial source, I've identified the origins of human beings in Australia stretch between 26 to 120,000 years. But the 26,000 is quite definitive, whereas 120 seems far less. Yeah? Following this source, I'm prompted to look more. So what do I really need to know about? Well, I sort of need to know how you're getting this evidence, man. You know, because you're giving me all these numbers and stuff like that, but how are you getting it? And what methods are you using? And I don't know anything about that stuff. Yeah? Are you the same? Okay. So I did some searching around the methods for dating. Okay? Dating in archaeology. Okay? I realised I sort of couldn't really, I could keep reading about facts about time, but unless I actually knew how things were collected, I actually was just going to keep on getting loose threads. So I went through the Canadian Encyclopedia. Dating in archaeology. For those researchers working in the field of human history, the chronology of events remains a major element of reflection. Archaeologists have access to various techniques for dating archaeological sites or the objects found on those sites. There are two main categories of dating methods in archaeology: indirect or relative, and absolute. Okay. So what's my question now? If I think about my previous source, what do you think I'm thinking? I didn't know.
What category, what method did they use?
Yeah, well now I'm curious about Lake Mungo. Did they discover that via indirect or absolute evidence? Because it didn't say anything about the type of evidence, did it? Okay, and I don't really know anything about the type of evidence, so I can keep going on. And look at this, okay? Relative dating includes methods that rely on analysis of comparative data or the context in which the object of one finder's data is found. This approach helps to order events chronologically, but it does not provide the absolute age of an object. The most commonly used are soil stratigraphy, analysis, and typology. Have you ever heard those words before? Yeah? I hadn't really. I hadn't heard this word or this word. I don't even know what they mean. So I have to go on and read. So in order to understand that, I'm going to read more about them. What was the method used to gather information in Australia? You know, now that I'm learning more about this, I actually sort of know what I need to know. Can you see my understanding develop? Okay. Next one. You know, I'll go through this a little bit. First, the only type of techniques that can help clarify the actual age of an object is absolute techniques. Radiocarbon dating, dendrochronology, and thermoluminescence. Oh, look at these. Like, if literacy was my capability, my vocabulary would be exploding right now. You know, in the last 2 minutes, I've given you 5 terms you've never heard before. Yeah? All describing different archaeological methods of dating. Okay? So here's what I want to know. This is a really key question. Okay? Because at the moment, my most secure source to my answer is 26,000 years, based on the one source I looked at. It seems like Lake Mungo 1, Body 1, has given the most definitive evidence. Was the most securely dated form of evidence at Lake Mungo established due to absolute dating? If not, well then I'm sort of back to square one. If yes, well then I'm actually getting something. I could actually have my first piece of potentially substantiated definitive evidence. Are there levels of absolute dating? Because this is what I don't get. If you've got these 2 body samples, and one's definitive and one's not, there must be levels of absolute dating. Yeah? That give variance. So really interesting. Okay, here's what I learned. Here's the questions I've got.
The other part of information said that it depends on what type of evidence. So if it's like whatever, then, then it will change the type of absolute method.
Yeah, definitely. So my story's developing, okay? I'll go through the next parts. I'm not going to do this kind of in as much depth as we move forward. I've discovered key language to help me define approach to dating matter. However, I'm not yet sure what method is more reliable or common and which methods were used in the case of the Australian fossils. I need to learn more about the specific cases of the evidence. Like, I know about Lake Mungo and the Mungo Man, but I don't know what methods they used. I don't know what evidence they found. I just had a general overview and summary. Okay, so I've created questions. So where's this led me? Well, now I'm going to go deeper into those particular areas. Okay, a couple of quick things. I went to Wikipedia. Okay, because I didn't really know a lot about Lake Mungo, and I just wanted a general understanding of it. Okay, I'm not going to use this for my final research source, but it just gave me some really interesting information. It told me about the time and the person who discovered it. It told me about this idea of geomagnetism. Okay, so one of the big things about Lake Mungo is a big site for geomagnetism, everyone. Okay, unbelievable, isn't it? I can see how interested and conveyed you are. Mungo Lady was initially estimated to be 25,000 years old, although a more recent multi-university study said it was 40,000 years old. Well, that's not what they said in what I just read. Ugh, okay? The site dating used this, or luminescence dating, okay? Now, none of this stuff is true to me yet, because I got it from Wikipedia, but it might be relevant, so I'm going to substantiate. Ready for fun? So now I started to go deeper, more specific. I stopped doing general searches and I started looking in databases. I went to this Australian National University Open Research Database and I found an analysis of the surface collection written in July 1980. Okay.
Would that be a primary source if it was written around time?
Could be. Okay, it's not written by Bowler, which is the name of the guy. Okay, but you know, so I'm in 1980. It's interesting, isn't it? Like that I've actually found this resource. I found it quite quickly. Like I said, this is still within the hour, guys. Okay, this is 243 pages long. I did not read 243 pages. Okay, I looked at the abstract and the information. I used the table of context and went to the summary, the conclusion, and the mental periods, and did a skim. Okay, found this. Mungo and Zazi deposits have been radiocarbon dated to about 40,000 years and 18,000 years respectively. Okay, so what was the traditional, like, now what I'm confused about is I read something really early in that museum thing that's got me a little bit worried. What do you think it was? Yeah, it said that there was types of, because of the progression of technology, there are types of dating that are now obsolete. This was in 1980, so I'm worried.
It also said that I remember that carbon dating isn't as accurate
when we did it the other day. Yeah, that's right. I also found this written in 1976. Now, the Mungo people were found in 1974, so it's 2 years afterwards. Okay, this was only 30 pages, so I could skim this one pretty easily. Okay, but what did I find in here? The earliest evidence for human occupation yet detected in this area comes from high water shoreline deposits of the Mungo unit, relics dating to 24 and 32,000 years old. So how were the relics dated and how was that collected? You know, because you're not talking about the, like, are you talking about the bodies? Are you talking about shells? I don't know, okay? Over here, at the time of discovery, the stratigraphic positions of the fireplaces within the Mungo unit indicated that all their ages were greater than 24,000 years. Okay, so I'm getting towards this point, you know, I think it's not 10,000 years, it must be more. The restricted area of these sites, there's considerable variation in thickness, colour and lithology, reflecting the variability of dune building processes. For example, at the site of group fireplaces. Now, by this point, you might be falling asleep, but I was right in it by this point, everyone, okay? Because it was my research and I was following, I was right in it, you know? And I'm reading this and I'm thinking, hey, what they basically said in this is because this area was a lake but is now dried up, the water can collect extra sediment on things that would not be collected had it been in dry land. So that can affect the dating. So I'm curious about, could the variation, the global surface geomagnetism, affect the legitimacy of dating in this site? Because this is so far one of the most substantial answers I've got to my question, but this has thrown it into disarray. Ooh. Okay, so that's as far as I got in an hour. Okay? You know, but what you can see, or what I hope you can kind of see, reflection question, can you see my understanding developing? Can you see it? Can you see how I started not knowing anything, but now how my questions and my understanding are growing? Yeah? If you think that is visible, then that's a good folio, isn't it? This is good evidence because I'm showing, and I can talk you through the story of where I started and how my evidence grew. Okay? If I was going to interview someone, so let me now come back to this. Okay? If I was now going to interview someone, do you think I'd ask the same questions?
Probably not. Because you made questions while researching yourself and you have a better understanding.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I wanted to show you this just because I wanted you to think a little bit more strategically about this. If I was going to talk to someone now, I wouldn't get them to say how long have humans been in Australia, because I think their answer would be, well, it depends. I would ask questions like, you know, tell me a little bit about the carbon dating process. How reliable is radiocarbon dating? Okay, tell me a little bit about, what is it, fluoroluminescence. You know, that was mentioned in one of these things. Do you know anything about the Mungo site? Do you know the processes that they used? Do you know if they were absolute or were they relative? You know? So I'd actually be talking to this person. After 1 hour of research, my conversation is completely changed. My vocabulary, my understanding, the questions I'm asking, the approach I'm taking is completely different. Okay, can you see that? Now again, if I was doing literacy as my capability, you know, I might have this as my initial piece of evidence versus the questions I ask later on down the track. And that would show my vocabulary developing, it would show my communication, it would show me coming across like an expert as opposed to coming across as clueless. Can you see that? Okay. So 3 quick points just to take us to the end of this, okay? Process summary, okay? Start by researching broadly. That's what I did, okay? And then refine. Gather initial understanding through general channels. Wikipedia is not a bad way. If you don't know anything about your topic, start there. Get some words, get some terms, get some ideas, ask some questions. They're a great way for painting the initial picture and setting direction. Gather questions and terminology that will lead your understanding forward. Okay? If you don't know anything, if I didn't know anything about archaeology, then I wouldn't have been able to get to those questions. Like my understanding wouldn't have been good enough to get the answers I'm currently getting. You know, following that 1 hour of research yesterday afternoon, I could probably talk to you now for 20 or 30 minutes about archaeology, and I'd be using all kinds of different language and terms. I'd be quite educated on the subject. I wouldn't just be like, what is archaeology? Like Indiana Jones. You don't know what you don't know, and I think this is really important for a lot of you. Okay, you've probably set your topic, you've got your question, but similar to me, there's a lot of stuff I realised during that I actually realised I didn't know. You know, it wasn't actually a case of just, oh, it's 42,000 years. Okay, but how was that? How did you figure that out? I don't know that. I need to find that out. But now I know that I need to find that out, so that's going to help me. Yeah? Last one, if you make a key discovery, something really relevant. You know, like I said, like Mungo was my best source, okay? From my initial reading, it seemed like the most sure thing. And then I found out that the most reliable information comes from absolute data. So straight away, if I could connect those two things, then I'd really have something. Yeah? Okay? So make sure that be cautious and conscious of the sources and dates of information. Okay? You saw that when I went to that 1976 and that 1980 article. I got some good stuff out of that, but I'm conscious that they're old. Yeah? And I know, based on other sources, that can mean that the data, because the technology's changed. So I'm conscious and I'm cautious. Yeah, I'm not like, woohoo, you know? I'd have to substantiate that. Okay, so really important. You need to dedicate time. So this is, you know, what do I do? What should I be doing? What should I be doing in my lessons? Dedicate time to expanding your understanding. What have you learned today that you didn't know yesterday? I can tell you everything I learned after 1 hour of searching. So what are you going to be able to tell me after one lesson of folio work today? You know? If you're like, oh, I don't know, I'm still thinking about it. Oh, okay. I played solitaire. Like, that's not helping. Okay, now if I only had 1 hour to do this assignment, I've still got evidence I could present. Yeah? If you gave me 10 hours, then I'd have 10 times as much. And if you gave me 10 years, then I'd probably have like some kind of, like an encyclopedia or something like that. So everything is relevant to time. Okay? Your research project is reflective of the time that you have to research. You've got 4 weeks. Okay? And everyone in the States got 4 weeks. But if you sit there for 3 weeks and do nothing, and then you do 1 week worth of actual stuff, and then you expect to get a better grade than someone who's been doing all 4 weeks doing this kind of stuff, well then you're dreaming. Make sense? Okay, so time is important. Think about how has this, once you read something, has it extended or challenged your current understanding? Has this understanding affected the direction of your focus? I had on just that previous slide there before, I had the question, should I now change my question? You know, can I find it, how long have humans been in Australia? Is there an answer to that? Well, it doesn't seem like it, does it? You know, I think, like I said, if I asked an expert, I think the short answer is, it depends. Yeah? So maybe now that I've got a better understanding, maybe now I need to refine my question, and that's perfectly fine. You know, I'm not locked into this thing. Maybe my question now reflects, and it could even be there was so much stuff about Mungo. Maybe I'm just focusing on Mungo, like how accurate is, you know, the origin dating of the human remains at Lake Mungo? You know, maybe that's now my question. Or maybe that's my sub-question. You know what I mean? Okay? So don't expect that you've got all of the knowledge that you have to do this. So how has it affected the direction of your process? I just read something that's completely changed my perspective on this issue. Yeah? Okay, last one, actively record the process. Like I said, I did all of this with the exception of the process summary. I did that this morning, okay, after doing a bit of reflection, but everything else I did during the hour. All the screenshots, all the highlighting, all the questions, all the summaries, all the comments, all the reflections, I did in the hour. I did them as I went. I didn't just do it all and then come back and make a PowerPoint about it. That would be stupid. Yeah? I did it as I went. I just collected things. It was easy. I took screenshots, I took URLs, I wrote down, like, my questions were like 5 words. I wrote things as I went, I put it all on a PowerPoint, and then I could really easily show you the story of where I started and where I finished. Yeah? Okay? So really important. Think holistically about what you're progressing. Reflect on what is valuable versus what is not. You know, is geomagnetism valuable to my question? I'm not sure yet. I might read about it a little bit more, but it could end up being a loose end, so I'm not going to chase that any further. You know, some people said it was important, some people said it wasn't. Reflect on what is valuable versus what is not. Now this is the guts of what I want to see in your folio, okay? What did you take on and why? What did you disregard and why? Has your focus question changed? Why? Have you discovered a critical component to your answer? How? Where? Why? That's what the folio is all about. That make sense? So those little reflections and questions I put in amongst things are really important. All cool? All right. We made it, everyone. Okay? And I know, and I hope, you know, like I said, I can see a lot of you are like, whoa. But hopefully it just illustrates to you what that process looks like. And what I hope you can sort of see in me is that my interest and my passion for it grew the more I looked into it. Could you see that? Start knowing nothing. But I got interested in it because I was motivated to go further and find out more. You need to find that feeling, okay? If you can't find that feeling, then you're going to just hate the next 10 weeks or the next 15 weeks, yeah? Okay? You picked the topic, you chose the direction, so you better enjoy it, otherwise you're your own worst enemy. Fair enough? Okay, great. So like I said, I hope that was valuable, and I hope that people have got a bit of a sense of, like, if you haven't started yet with your research, or if you haven't really started going anywhere, hopefully that gives you somewhere to go. Yeah? Okay? All of that stuff's available, mate. The video available, the PowerPoint is available on the site. Okay? You can grab it, look through it, anything along that line. Okay? The way I went through it isn't the only way that you can research. Okay? So remember that there's multiple ways to go about it, and the one thing that I didn't kind of include in that is each source, like doing that source analysis, like where is this from and why is it credible and stuff like that, are things that I didn't do as part of this, I didn't do in my hour, but useful things to do as well. Okay? Everyone cool? Okay, so I'll stop the recording.